Hello, dear audience. Today we are here with you together to continue our conversations on a theme we started several years ago now, Feast of Healthy Thoughts. And today we decided to speak about a very important aspect of life, something that has always concerned, has always been very desired reality for all humanity. I remember when I was a teenager, when I was reading novels, historical novels, especially novels that had to do with the Armenian history, it was always said that all those novels were around wars. And I was always feeling joy in my heart when I came to a point where one king established peace, and it was said that I always knew that it's not going to last more than 10 years. And the longest was 15, maybe 20 years, and then wars started again in the history. So today we're going to speak about this phenomenon that humanity has always desired, peace, and it has always been present a very short time, and then something has happened to disturb it. Since last several times we were speaking about a prayer or a business card that originated from Mother Teresa. She wrote this little note as a business card. I want to connect today's topic to that prayer and continue from that point. Mother Teresa ends her prayer with this line: "The fruit of service is peace." She starts with sacrifice and she ends with peace. And she says that the peace comes from service. Now I want to connect this with another expression that she had when they called her to walk against wars. She said she won't do it, but she will do it for peace. This connects very interestingly. In her prayer she says that peace is the fruit of service. And she agrees to walk, to campaign for peace. In other words, she is willing to turn her life into service, which will bring peace as a fruit. So today we'll be speaking about peace. Last week, the Roman Catholic Church and many Protestant churches who are part of the tradition celebrated the feast of Francis of Assisi. And they mention very decisively, very distinctly that he was completely in peace with nature, with humanity, and he was an example of peace for this world. We know many little stories that he had relationship even with the animals, which means that human being was in peaceful relationship with the creation. So today we are going to speak about peace. We have many quotations from the New Testament where Christ himself speaks about peace, where he raises his hand and calms the disturbed sea, the waves, and says, "Be at peace," and the sea calms down. So Presbytera, thank you for coming and being with our audience today. And we're going to speak about a very interesting topic. Let's start with explaining what peace in general is in the world. And then we'll go to probably the spiritual aspect of it. What is peace? Sometimes we can think that we're in a peaceful environment, but in reality there will be, I remember the years of the Cold War. There was no war, but people were tense in both sides of the world, waiting every second that something can start. So let's speak about peace. What is your first thought?
Thank you, Arkady. I don't know what my first thought is because you're right. There are many nuances and dimensions to the word peace. the way people understand the word. And so this is a real conversation we're having. I'm just reminding the viewer that we come having thought about, prayed about, done research on the topic, and we come prepared with notes, and then we start talking, and it's a real conversation. So we don't know what the other person's going to say next. I need to say that from the beginning so that it's always fun to see what we've said by the end of the episode. And so regarding peace, there are many ways to people understand that. And so I appreciate that you want to start in a more everyday approach, and then maybe to look at it from a spiritual perspective, especially our understanding as Orthodox Christians. Because in everyday life, this is an important issue, and not everybody is Christian, not everybody thinks about the word peace in the same way. And so when we think about peace, there's two types of peace that come to mind. One is interpersonal and interpersonal, the microcosm, the small level of peace, where we could be personally at peace or in our relationships with other people peaceful. And then there's the macrocosm, the bigger picture, the community, the region, the country, internationally, types of peace, where we might be thinking about armed conflict or the threat of armed conflict. There's many permutations of that, but let's say there's a microcosm of peace and the macrocosm of peace, and within a microcosm there's what's happening inside us, and are we persons who are living out of a peaceful place, and are we sharing that peace with others, or are we stirring things up? And so this is an immense issue, and I think we might wind up talking more than one episode on this topic. I was speaking this morning with some friends on this topic, and they were really kind, and we had a wonderful, deep conversation. And the women that were in the store with me each have had recent tragedies in their life. The tragedies, thank God, did not end in fatalities. In fact, both women, one woman in her 50s, the other in her 30s, their husbands are coming out of a very bad situation medically, but coming out of it, And so there's a lot of turmoil and chaos that happens in our lives. I'm thinking of my two friends, in all of our lives, when life hits us unexpectedly, and it's either a tragedy or a pending tragedy. And so we are in an uproar, in a turmoil that all agitated inside, and it's hard to see what we need, how to proceed. So I was asking them, well, how do you deal with it? I was just asking them. I wasn't asking theology, I wasn't asking spirituality. And one of them said, it's being able to trust that there's something bigger than you, that is beyond you, that is trustworthy. And that's what's helped me have peace, is to trust that which is beyond me. And I'm thinking, beautiful, beautiful. And so trusting something beyond us indirectly is saying that we are not the authors of peace. We are finite. We are bits of clay created in the image and likeness of God. And so what is peace? Is it a demeanor of serenity? Yes. Is it a place of calm? Yes. Is it a place where we forget all things? Not necessarily. The kind of peace that the church talks about is a peace that is from outside of our own understanding. And so it's a kind of peace that includes and goes beyond our conceptions and our relationships in everyday life.
When you said that we are not the authors of peace, but we are kind of broken, and we participate in the peace that is coming from something beyond us, above us. I was wondering, what is causing no peace? Whatever is the opposite of the peace. I have this example, that's what I was thinking on the way here. A fisherman goes fishing when the waters are disturbed, because the fish cannot see in front of them, so they can catch them easier. Now, when there is no peace in the world, there has to be a reason for it, to misguide or to guide or to control or whatever thing comes to mind. And can we say that because the author of peace is God, the author of no peace can be the evil or whatever is on the earth? And what are the reasons for this? Why does the earth have to be in such disturbance?
That's a beautiful metaphor. that in many ways we're the fish
Yes.
in the water, and somebody or something comes along and stirs up the waters and muddies the waters, so we, the little fishies, can't see the traps that are being set for us in a thick mess of the water. So that's excellent. That's excellent, Arkady. Because let's start with ourselves. There's lots of ways the waters get muddied. And when I started saying earlier about we're not God, we're finite. And we have that since before the fall. We talk about the fall of Adam and Eve many times in these discussions, that God created the human person to live eternally with Him, to grow eternally with Him in His love, and to share in His holiness, to share in His very self, in ways that creatures can, in ways we don't understand. And when Adam and Eve disobeyed out of their immaturity, out of their desire, out of their foolishness, out of their desire to be God without God, and chose to disobey because they wanted to be God without God. They wanted all those fruits, but they didn't want the help and the support and to grow in communion with the loving God. And so, but that impulse for eternity, for which we are created, is still within us, even in our fallen state. It's easy to overreach ourselves. It's easy to wind up trying to do things knowingly or unknowingly that take us beyond ourselves, sometimes in a good way, in a healthy way, and God works with that, but sometimes in a way where we get in our own way because we're trying to be God without God, and gee whiz, I'm doing this and this and this, and while it might start well, it rarely finishes well. We abandon that and we go to something else. We can get used to that pattern of life, and we don't even realize we're not at peace. And that's what bothers me about some of this, is that some of us don't even realize we're so used to our frame of reference that we're kind of, it's familiar, and so it's our set point. And so rather than discerning, how can I grow more into the person I'm called to become? How can I be a better human being in a way that is good for all involved, including myself? What helps me in discerning that question is the Serenity Prayer. It wasn't originated through AA, but made popular through AA, that says, God, grant me the serenity or the peace to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so that first line, grant me the serenity or the peace to accept the things I cannot change. That's the hardest, I think, of that little prayer, to acknowledge and to accept. And sometimes I have to repeat that many times in the day, so that little phrase, help me to accept the things, give me the serenity, the peace to accept the things I cannot change, will help me at least draw a broad line between what's of my ability and my business and not of my ability or my business. And that can be, for some of us, a daily grinding or a daily crucifixion, and it's not a bad one. When the prayer says, God grant me the serenity or the peace to accept the things I cannot change, it's saying two things. It's saying, I'm not God, and to acknowledge what I can do and who I am in this context, and to surrender and let God do the rest, do whatever we can do, and then turn our attention to the love of God and let God do the rest, and keep our eyes open to see what happens next. This wisdom is a beautiful wisdom, is applicable for people who are outside the Christian tradition, within the Christian tradition, and especially within the Christian tradition, because I believe as Christians we can really enter in a more penetrating way with that when we apply what the Lord said through His teachings in the gospel.
With this sentence, give me the serenity or the peace to accept things that I cannot change, I see two sides to this. One is the positive side that excited me quite a bit, is that when I cannot change something, when it's beyond my strength, and I'm stuck with it, and I constantly worry myself with it, it's like banging my head to the wall instead of going around the wall. And if I accept that there are things that I cannot change, I will be open for other things, maybe. And I will see what's around, what else is available. I'll live with this for a while I'm enjoying other things that God is sending to us. But the other side of the coin is carelessness. It can kind of guide, okay, I can't do anything about this, so I'm not going to do anything. What is your understanding of those?
Say more about the carelessness.
It can become a nature that it's okay to deal with things that you cannot change. Then those things can grow and say, well, I cannot change this, I cannot change that, I can't change myself, I cannot change my bad habits, so I have to live with them. And eventually it will become like you're living whatever and you're not doing anything. That's what
Okay, that helps, because that kind of carelessness is like being cavalier.
Mm-hmm.
It's throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because the prayer says, grant me the serenity or the peace to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Serenity or peace, courage, and wisdom. It takes courage to do what you can do and let go at the same time. Another expression from the 12-step world that really has its roots in the ancient desert tradition, which is why I really have such love and affection for the 12 steps of AA, is a slogan they've created, which is, do the right thing and let go of the consequences. Or do the legwork and let go of the consequences. Mm-hmm. And so the courage to do the things I can. And so if you said a bad habit, okay, I'm powerless over certain aspects of the bad habit, but what am I able to do? And to do it. And it takes courage. And to let go of the consequences, which is a way of trusting God. We let go of the consequences, not to throw them away, but we give them to God. And so this little prayer really sets us up to open ourselves up to the love of God that's always streaming toward us, to encourage us, to root us in Him more deeply, and to perhaps even increase our discernment in how to proceed. Sometimes the answers are right there. We don't see them because we're too busy controlling.
Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of an expression or a thought that I just recently read in a book called My Grandfather's Blessings. In one of the chapters, the author says, we are given many blessings, and we sometimes, and most of the time probably, take only few of them. And she continues in her discussion saying that sometimes even a sickness, a very bad sickness, can be a blessing to teach us something. What do we have to do? What have we been doing wrong? And she brings an example from a person who came from a farmer's family, and he was the only one, the first one who had a high education, and he went far in his career, and he got really sick at one point. And everybody at work was waiting until he recovers and comes back, and they can go with the same courage and with the same excitement with their business. She says that he was an example at his workplace for everyone, how much dedication he had. After 2 days, when he feels a little bit better, he comes and resigns and goes out, buys a little farm, and lives on the farm with his family. And then he tells the psychologist, who's the author of the book, that that's when I realized that I'm in a wrong place, that I'm wasting my time, my life. I ignore my family. I work 60 hours a week. And no matter how much success I get, I became sick, not only physically, but also spiritually. So I'm going to accept the family tradition, even though it's hard, to be a farmer, grow grape wines, and live peacefully. So I talked too much, but I'm going to connect this in a minute with the New Testament. Or maybe I'll do that and then I'll listen to your explanations. When Christ sent His disciples to the world, He says, go, say peace to every family, every household that you enter, and let your peace come upon it. But if it be not worthy, meaning the household, let your peace return to you. In other words, He knew, sending His disciples to the world, that their peace is not going to be accepted. some places. It's not everywhere that. And he didn't want that peace be lost. He said, let it come back to you.
What is the kind of peace then? This is the peace that the Lord says passes beyond human understanding that he's talking about. And it's a peace that's rooted in himself. It's his peace that proceeds from him as God. And so the divine peace that comes through a divine person who loves us, loves all of humanity, every person more than any one of us could imagine. You know, we hear these stories about God's love for each person, and I think many of us, because we're busy or we're so sophisticated or we buy into something, we poo-poo that as, oh, these are just nice stories, and then we go off and do our own thing. Mm-hmm. And we don't stop to think about what is being said through these passages in the Scripture, what is being said to us through especially the stories based in the Scripture, from the Scripture, or that have come to us through Christian history, about God's unbelievable love for us. And so God's peace is our opening ourselves, being receptive to, and God is the one who helps us do that, but we have to do our share to his very presence and love himself. That's already in us if we accept that and work and strive to grow in that relationship. And so it's a peace beyond our understanding. The peace that the world gives, and I'm all for peace in the world. You know, I'm all for lack of civil war. I'm all for lack of international wars. I'm sorry, I'm all for lack of Cold War. I really am. And I'm praying for a healthier planet. I think this is something we need to be awake to and aware of, that we all have a part to play. But to confuse peaceful management of the planet, you know, we read about in church history how important the Pax Romana was for the establishment of the gospel. Now, what's the Pax Romana? It's approximately 1,000 years of relative peace that the Roman Empire dominated, so that all the major foes of the Roman Empire were kept at bay, and with a firm hand, maintained, maybe a little bit too fascist for most Western persons to appreciate, but maintained a peace so that the Lord himself was able to spread the gospel under that system as quickly and efficiently as possible. So God uses our human, again, providence, we talked about providence in the past, and is present within and leads and guides human history as God respects radically and unconditionally human free will. Still, God's will prevails to do his will. And so, as I share something we've said in the past, that in the end, we believe as Christians that Christ will return, that in the end, it will be Christ who will be all in all. What that means, that can be another conversation sometime. But that's the presence of Christ in his peace that will be realized completely at some point. And what we're saying, what the church has been saying, what the good news is saying, that this is present with us now. We just have to make ourselves available to that by cleansing our perspective that it's not about us. We're not God. Mm-hmm. We are finite, made by God. We are broken. We fall, we sin, and that these need to be constantly brought peacefully, lovingly to our loving God, Father who loves us like little children, to receive forgiveness, get right-sized in his presence, and discern what happens next. This is a foundation of peace where God himself grows within us. Our relationship, our communion with God grows within us.
I want to extend this a little bit even further, reading the next quotation from the New Testament, which kind of connects with what you said about, yes, I am for the peace, I am for no wars, but this peace that we are speaking is different, has a different dimension. And that's what Christ, I think, also speaks about when saying, think not that I am come to send peace on earth. He was not talking about political peace. He was not a Caesar, or he was not a king to say, well, everybody be peaceful. Otherwise, you know what's going to happen with you. And now when I read this line, I reflected back to Mother Teresa's line. She says, the fruit of service is peace. And it's interesting that Christ gave the example to his disciples at the end. He washed their feet and said, do the same thing. And says, go and say peace to your household. And in Luke's account, it's a little bit different. Say peace to this house, he says, and if man of peace lives there, your peace will go and rest on him. If not, it will come back to you. It's a little bit different. Matthew says, let it come back to you, or I wish that it comes back to you, and this one says, it will come back to you, don't worry about it. Don't worry wasting your peace. And one thing I noticed here is that maybe the whole household will not accept the peace, but maybe there will be somebody there who is a person of peace, and according to their ability of acceptance, that peace will rest on them. Maybe you will not even notice that one person accepted your peace, the rest came back. But that's interesting, and it's interesting how he approaches the spreading of peace.
You know what comes to my mind? The spreading of peace this way, it's like an infection. Go and infect the world with my peace, meaning God's peace.
Yes.
And so are people receptive? Those who are receptive. And what makes a person receptive? Who don't have an immunity to the peace of God. What makes us immune? The drugs we manufacture in our own minds and hearts that feed our own delusions of grandeur, that it's all about us, that we are God without God, that we build an image of ourselves based on our imagination or what the society around us tells us a person who has his act or her act together looks like. And meanwhile, if we believe that does harden us that makes us immune to the love of God. What makes us receptive to the infection of God's peace is our willingness to be open, to be humble, and honest. And so if there's a kind of openness to honesty that someone in the house is, I'm not God, that peace is going to affect the person. I would say we're just playing with it a little bit, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. When I was asking the girls today at the store more about what do you think about peace? What's the opposite of peace? Different answers came. Anxiety, turmoil, dissatisfaction. I thought of vanity. Why would vanity be an opposite of peace? Because vanity is an offspring of pride. You know, if I try to be God without being God, then, and I have some success at fooling myself and others that I am, then there is a kind of, let's say, human or fallen beauty that comes from that. And we can really get an excitement and a charge out of that. And so, and I try to maintain that, or any of us can try to maintain that. And that takes on an end of its own. And so pride has a life of its own, and vanity has a life of its own, one of its daughters, so to speak, one of its offspring. It's impossible to be growing in authentic peace, this kind of peace, where we are receptive to the love of God, and God himself is growing in us, that helps us be tranquil and present and real and right-sized and open if we are running around chasing our vain expectations or our delusions of grandeur, chasing the lies. You know, that energy that does create a turmoil, that does create a kind of spell, if you will, where there's a turmoil and satisfaction that masquerades as peace, but isn't really peace. We talked about in the spirituality and addiction class, or we will talk about, but I have in the past, that there's authentic life and there's being high. And we don't have to be high just on alcohol and drugs. We can be high on our own delusions of grandeur. We can get off on many things that make us high, which cut us off authentic relationship with our own selves, others, creation, and God. And so authentic joy and authentic peace are pretty much the same thing.
And in the other class that I took right after that, there was a poetry that was quoted, and we were talking about paying attention, concentration. And this poet says that when he wants to pay attention, when he wants to concentrate, he looks at the worries that are inside of him, and then he takes them and puts them outside of himself, one at a time. Sometimes they come back, he puts them out again. And then the successful end of it is that he's watching all his worries from inside of himself that are sitting out there and sleeping like cattle. And he's free. He's open. There's a lot of space in his heart. He's in peace. So this was...
That's beautiful. As an Orthodox, I'd say that's just step one.
Mm-hmm.
And beautiful, because what you're describing in a simple story from that class is a foundation of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And to quote Metropolitan Callistus Ware, all expressions of authentic prayer are expressions of meditation. We've said that here before.
Yes.
But not every expression of meditation is prayer.
Mm.
And so that's a beautiful way of putting, in fact, sometimes if people have a hard time praying or even a hard time getting more still so they can pray, this is a good exercise to find each one, put them out, take them by the hand, take them outside of you, let them be like sleeping cattle. Is that what you said? I like that. Let them sleep, let them take a nice nap so that you can be more open and spacious within. As an Orthodox Christian, I would say, and then allow that spaciousness to be turned toward the love of God, toward God Himself, and be present to that. That's the foundation of prayer. That's what the word prosevchi really means, to be authentically connected to the other in a good way. It's not just kind of opening ourselves up and hang out to nothing. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's wonderful, because I remembered a story from the New Testament where Christ speaks about exactly this. When He cleanses a demonic person, says that's not enough, because it's like a house. The thieves are living in it. You go and kick them out of the house, you clean the house and you put a guard. They go outside in the desert, they come back, they see it's all cleaned and there's a guard. Now they go back and collect 7 more like themselves, or 70 like themselves, and come back with even more power. And if, I think my understanding is, if the house is empty, they'll come and take over it again. But if it has been surrendered or given to the owner of that house, to God, then these thieves will come and find it already full of people. They will not be able to get in again. That's very interesting.
Well, it's trading up. When we open ourselves to the love of God, when we open ourselves to truth, when we strive to be more authentic to who we are created to be, and let God turn us into that person, poof, 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 a minute at a time, as we walk through our lives mindfully and as peacefully as possible, and hopefully conducting our responsibilities and relationships as well as we can. When something like that happens, when we do trade up, and let's say we'll call it a demon is sort of like dealt with and cleaned out of our internal house, if we don't make changes as we trade up, then our house of our inner selves is ripe for plundering again, maybe even more so. Mm-hmm. And so there's the expression, when we trade up, we exchange an old set of problems for a new set of problems, but that's not a bad thing. So when we trade up and we grow in the Lord, we also have to trade up our discernment, our discrimination faculties in the biblical sense of the word discrimination, not the political sense of discrimination, which is not of God, but in the biblical understanding of discrimination, to really set up blocks to that which is not life-giving, to that which is not of God, so that it frees us up for new things to come from that new place we are in the presence of God, and let God do that work. I don't know what that is, but we have to do our part by trading up, even in how we take care of ourselves.
When we speak, it seems to me that we are kind of going a journey and showing to ourselves what is the way of reaching the peace. And you have mentioned many times that love makes us vulnerable. When we go through these steps, now we talked about cleaning the house and then putting a guard on it so that those things don't come back. Letting God go in and live there so that it's occupied. There is no room for anything else. I have a quotation from the New Testament again, Mark 5:33 and 34, where the woman who had illness comes and touches Christ. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing that was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. It's interesting that she has gotten healed, but now she's worried. She's all in trembling. She's clean. And now, the next, which is the response of Christ, says, "And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith made you whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague." It's wonderful that it kind of connects to our conversation in a way that it made her vulnerable. She was healed. She came to a state where she had never been. And now she doesn't want to get that.
That's beautiful.
That plague back.
That's beautiful, right. That's beautiful, beautiful example. And when you said it, I'm so glad you brought it up, Arkady. When you said it, in my imagination, I could almost feel her being exposed. She's healed. She knows this master can heal her somehow. Mm-hmm. And doesn't realize, because who really knows that this is God himself? And knows that she somehow touched God. That the healing that, I can almost imagine she felt gutted in a good way. Gutted completely of all that, the malice that goes with the sickness. Because how many times did the Lord say to people, you are healed and your sins have been healed as well? And then there were later other parts in the scriptures where people would, in trying to challenge Jesus, would say, what's harder, to heal someone or to forgive sins? But what would Jesus do? He would do both.
One without the other wouldn't.
It both point to the same thing. Only God can do that. It was a trick question. They were trying to trap him, and he turned the tables on them by doing both. What are you going to say? And so, in a sense, this is a very personal, very exquisite experience of this woman who, the way you read it, that she probably felt some kind of experience within her that she had never felt in her whole life. And as she was healed and gutted, so to speak, fell at his feet, realizing she had met God in a way that she had never met him before. And it was after that, it was sort of twofold. She reached, and then she threw herself at his feet. That did not always happen in the Gospels. As you remember, there's a story where Jesus heals.
They don't come back.
Right, 10 people with leprosy. And only one person comes back and says, hey, where's the other 9? Weren't there 10 people? Now, he wasn't doing this for his own gratification.
He wasn't doing bookkeeping.
Right. He was more concerned about them, their salvation, their healing, their serenity, their joy.
What's going to happen to them?
Exactly. They're being grounded in authentic life. Whatever is authentic, whatever is real, that's what's reality. Our abiding in the love of the living God, thrice holy. And so somehow they're missing out. Only one came. Well, this woman, Jesus, I'm sure, rejoiced that she not only was healed, that's like part 1, but she realized that and threw herself down at his feet and then said what he said.
Peace is not just absence of action. It's not just the absence of noise. I felt this kind of peacefulness in the ancient buildings of the ancient monasteries, one of them being in my village. When you entered inside, there was peace. It was like completely out of the world. You automatically became silent. You wouldn't dare to speak. Because first of all, it echoed, and you wanted to participate in that peace. It's kind of a mysterious thing. I don't want to explain how and why it happens. But in this sentence, I understand even more that peace is something that fills you. it doesn't empty you only. Emptiness or emptying yourself or putting this cattle outside, like you said, is the first step. And then the second step, you have to go back to see who helped you to empty yourself, to give account, to say thank you, or fell at the master's feet and say, now I'm ready to get something that is going to replace what I had before.
We raised a couple of things with that, and I want to go to the first one, if you don't mind. One is the monastery that you would visit as a young person in your village in Armenia. And what is it that you think made you have that feeling of peace when you would go there, as opposed to entering another building?
You can't explain. You go inside, there's a lot of noise actually, because the windows are broken, and the birds fly from one window, get out of the other, and they squeeze in between the windows. And there's this exquisite concert inside of the building. But yet there is another type of silence. When you speak, you hear disturbing this silence, and you don't want to speak. You just go into a corner and enjoy the peace. Even though these monasteries have been empty maybe over 200 years now.
I was wondering, when you were talking about entering the monastery into that space, you said it was magical and otherworldly. It was real and otherworldly and unable to explain. I'm wondering a sense of joy and peace that sprung in your heart as you would enter into this holy space, because the space is still holy. And that I'm just wondering how many prayers of holy ascetics,
1,000 years maybe.
1,000 years of holy ascetics. Ascetics is another word to refer to a monk or a nun or someone living a particular discipline of spiritual life that is countercultural, quite frankly. Not necessarily anti-cultural, but definitely other than what the dominant culture is promoting. Those holy people are still praying. Those holy people have just gone from earth to heaven, and for them, because they were holy, wasn't such a big step, because they were holy. And so I'm just wondering if you sensed, and maybe other people sensed, even in the abandoned church building, the reverberations of their prayers in the past and the power, the subtle power of their prayers right now as they're praying for all of us.
And also, I think the greatest part of it is that the simple people, without any guidance, have kept their simplistic prayers in those places. They always go put the candles on the walls, even it's not allowed. These people go and put their candles, and they say whatever they know. They just speak with God. Maybe right or wrong from the theological perspective, but that's not the point. The point is that these people keep praying in those places. These places are kind of pulling people towards themselves. And another aspect of it is the main building, which is called Holy Cross. When you enter in, right above the altar, there's the image of Holy Trinity. And when you go in, it's like God is staring at you. So you freeze. And I think that's also part of it.
That's beautiful, because that's an encounter. That somehow the icon of the Trinity invites the person entering the edifice to encounter, to engage, to open oneself up to the love of God. And it's very powerful when we are receptive to that.
We are running out of time. It flew very fast. Thank you very much, and I hope that our audience enjoyed. And thanks again. There's nothing else I can say. And have a good day. We'll see you next time, dear audience.